Welcome to another episode of Senior Living of Foresight TV. I don't know where I was going. Once in a while, I get distracted. I guess it's been a long week. I'm really Jill. Vitale-Aussem is my guest today. I am so excited to talk about leadership and the state of senior living. But before we get started, first this.
Hey guys, Steve Moran here.
Jill, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Steve.
I am so excited to be talking to you. We have not talked for ages, but I've been sort of stalking you. You've been, there have been articles and conversations. But let's actually just start with, and you were actually one of the very early people I met in senior living. I don't even know if you remember it, but I came and toured a building where you were the executive director in Denver, and I'll
Claremont Park. Yes, it's Claremont
I'll
Park.
bet it's been 10 years since that happened, but that was like, this is what it should be like. So it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I'll tell you the thing I remember most about it, that I liked the most about it, was this idea that you ran from really high-end senior living, expensive senior living, to people who were in subsidized housing in a single building. And it all worked. And what a testament to great leadership. But let's actually talk a little bit about you. Talk to me a little bit about sort of how you ended up in the senior living industry and what you were doing today.
My very first job in this field, I was we once called a dietary aide in a nursing home in high school. And that wasn't a great experience, right? It was in the 80s. And it was kind of one of those, oh my gosh, I hope that I never have to be in a place like this. And I hope nobody I ever love has to be in a place like this. And I always say, I wish I was one of those teenagers that was like, I found my mission in life and it's to change nursing homes. But that really wasn't me at the time. And I have, it's one of those weird things where I just kept getting called back to it almost. So when I was after undergrad, I did fundraising for a nonprofit senior living community in Western New York. And then I still didn't get that that's where I was supposed to be. And then after grad school, I eventually ended up as an administrator in training for a community in Minneapolis. And that's where, one of the things that I did there, because I had gone to a hotel school, so I had learned about hospitality. And so when I started at that community, I said, how are you supposed to know what it feels like to be a resident when you're, I was probably 26, 27 years old. Yeah. How am I supposed to know like what's good? And so I had the team admit me as a resident for 24 hours, with all the diagnoses. And that was really what sparked my passion, because it was a really great community, but it was really institutional. And I just realized, oh my gosh, we've got to do better. So that's really where it all started. And then over time, of course, I got involved with the Eden Alternative, and that really was what got me even more passionate about driving change and gave me the tools to drive change.
Got you. And so today you are?
So today I am the president and CEO of Christian Living Communities, which is a nonprofit multi-site organization based in the South Denver area.
Terrific. And you have a book?
I do.
Tell us about your book.
Yeah, so it's called Disrupting the Status Quo of Senior Living. And it was hard to write a book. You know that, Steve, right? Because you've written a book too.
I've written a book.
It almost killed me. But it was really all the things I learned in transforming a community. How do you really build true community? And I just had this book in me that needed to get out. And so it's been really fun. It was published in, I think, 2019. And it's been really fun hearing from people how it has sparked them maybe to think a little bit differently. We just are finishing up an organizational book club that we used with my book, and executive directors and people from our, I I hate the term corporate office, but our support office joined, and we once a month talk through things. And I learned so much from those conversations because, I look back at the book now, I'm like, oh, well, that was a dumb thing to say, or I've learned so much since I wrote that. So every time I have a conversation with someone, I learn something new and go deeper with the thoughts on the different topics.
Yeah, and having those conversations is so important. I know that as somebody who's written a book on leadership, and at the time I wrote it, I had sort of a team of 2 or 3 people, and now I've got a team of about 8 or 9. Some of those are part-time and some are full-time. And the thing that makes me smile and sobers me up at the same time is that it's actually a lot easier to write about leadership, tell other people how to lead than it is to do it yourself. Because people are really complicated.
Right.
And everybody's got their own stuff and their own needs and their own ideas. And so I don't know, how do you balance all that?
One of the things that has been really rewarding for me is, so when I was writing that book, I decided I'm just going to be real. And so a lot of it is written about the ways that I used to think and what I learned and the mistakes that I made. And for me, and for hearing from other people, they say, gosh, the fact that this isn't this book like, oh, Jill has it all figured out, or she woke up one morning and learned how to do, changing the culture of a community. I think it frees people up and makes them realize you learn, you make mistakes as you go and you learn, and it's okay. And it's part of the process. So I think that's really important for all of us as leaders. Whether you're writing a book or you're talking with people, is to acknowledge that it's a process and you make mistakes. And when you make mistakes now, you own up to it and you say, hey, well, I had never thought about it that way. I learned something new today. So I just tried to be really human and be really personal about it. So that helped. It wasn't like, it's not like one of those preachy kind of books.
Right. And I think, as I approach what we do at Senior Living Foresight, I think that everything that we do is just one grand experiment, right? And, you try stuff, you think about stuff. We've got some new projects we're working on, and I got this brilliant idea that came to me last Friday, a week ago today. Talked to my team about it, spent the weekend thinking about it, spent the rest of this week sort of talking to some other people. And today when I got back on my team meeting, I went, nah, that idea that I thought was a good idea turns out to not be a very good idea. And so we're not going to do that. And, and it's just, and no, there's no shame. One of my team members came to me and said, I'll not even tell you what it is because it's no secret. We're looking at hiring some virtual assistants out of the Philippines. And it's just a way to take a lot of the really rote stuff that we do, get it done by where it needs to really be done by humans, and in a cost-effective way. And so so I've got one of my team members working on it. She came to me a couple of days ago and said, I've completely failed on this, so I have to start over. And it's like, no, you didn't fail at all, because it was just your learning experiment. And now you know what to do.
Yeah. I think that, and if you're never making mistakes, then you're never trying anything new, right? Because that's what happens when you try something new. You have to have experiments and you have to make mistakes and go back to the drawing board and start again. And that's just the process.
So let's talk about the state of senior living today. Tell me what you think is terrific. Tell me what you think needs to be fixed.
Well, one of the interesting things is I'm hearing a lot of people recognizing and talking about the very deep need for disruption. And that we've got to look at doing things differently, which to me is really encouraging. Steve, I remember we talked years ago, and we did an interview years ago.
Yep.
And it was at a Masterpiece Living Lyceum, I think. And it was like this crazy idea of maybe we shouldn't be just focusing on serving people, and maybe we should focus on purpose. And at the time, it was kind of a weird thing. People are like, are you crazy? What are you talking about? What about the hospitality model? And now I hear a lot of people talking about that. COVID I hate talking about COVID, but it really shined the light on what we need to do to change things. And so I see a lot of discussions happening of change. So I'm part of Nexus Insights, which is the organization. I'm a fellow with them, the Bob Kramer's organization, Institute for Senior Living, and leaders from all over talking about how are we going to change things and drive things. So I think the other bright spot that came from COVID is every single one of us learned what it's like to be institutionalized, really, right? And to be, as the Eden Alternative says, right, lonely, helpless, bored. And we realized because of what we all went through, how painful that is and how awful it is. So that's a great springboard, right? Because now everybody can relate to it, to say we've got to do better.
Yeah, and so many things I want to talk about with you here. This is really hard where I want to go next. So I want to talk a little bit about I want to come back to this. I'm going to start with purpose. I've seen over the last maybe 6 months in particular, a lot more people in our industry talking about self-care. And I've really struggled with it because when I think self-care, it means, time off, going to the spa. And when I look at the research, when people sort of, maybe we'd even call it a kind of a focused hedonism. The research seems to suggest that has only a very short term, it's sort of like taking cocaine. You feel really good and then you actually feel worse about it. And yet I want to be very careful with that because, I don't want to minimize that. And so I've been thinking about this a lot relative to COVID. And when you think back to the early days of COVID, when it was so hard and it was scary, PPE was hard to find, people actually loved coming to work because they were a part of something special. And so I think it's worse now than it was then. And even though the circumstances are actually maybe better, safer, I don't know. Any thoughts on all that? I know that's sort of jumbly, but
no, I think I see where you're going with it, and I think that, some of the research that I've seen, if you're talking about leaders and people that work in our field with the burnout and needing to take care of ourselves. It's not just taking care of ourselves, it's being part of something. It's being part of a real community, right? And I think one of the studies that I read, it had to do with PTSD, not related to COVID, but just in general. And that when people were part of coming up with the solution to the problem, they're much less likely to experience PTSD, right? And so that self-determination, I'm part of something bigger. We're working together. We're going to do this together, and we're going to figure it out. So I think we do need to take care of ourselves, but a lot of making ourselves feel better is helping other people, right? And being a part of this interdependent kind of ecosystem. So I don't know. That's where my head goes when you ask that question.
Yeah, I think that it's really hard, right? And I want to be very careful because I don't live a very balanced. I know there's a lot of talk about balanced life. I don't live a very balanced life. I love my work. It's my hobby as well as the way I make a living, and so I don't apologize for that at all.
Right. And I think there's this. The other thing that's kind of interesting is to think that you can turn off. Now my work life is over and now my personal life starts is really kind of a false notion. So how do you find, if you really think about it, how do you find respite? Can you find that in your workday? Yeah, you probably can. How do you find joy and thinking about what you need as a human being rather than I can only get joy or happiness from outside of work? Because I'm like you, like I'm passionate and it's me, it's who I am, this work that I do. So
and for me, one of my single best, probably my single most favorite respite activity is actually more work, and that's teaching a bunch of 5th and 6th grade kids at my church, right? And I spend hours a week getting ready for that. I pour every bit of energy into it on Saturday mornings, and oftentimes I'll walk out exhausted and so happy. So I'm going to actually take a commercial break that sort of involves you. We are at Senior Living Foresight sponsoring the Evolve 22 or hosting the Evolve 2022 Life Enrichment Summit. It's all virtual in April, and Jill is one of our featured keynote speakers. And so Lola, who is producing the event for us, said, why don't you offer a discount? So there's this discount. It's Jill 2022.
Oh, I love it.
You're named by that after it, or it's named after you or something, and that's good for 25% off, but it's only good until midnight today, February 18. So jump on it now. If you try it tomorrow, it won't work. So I'm going to leave that up for a little bit for you to take a look at. So as you know, Dan Hudson is one of the big advocates for in our industry for disruption, and his concern, legitimate concern, I think in many cases, is that mostly what's happening is small incremental changes rather than disruption. So talk to me about what disruption means to you.
You know, in my mind, it's first disrupting the way we think about things. Because if you it's sort of like bringing in little programs, nothing ever sticks if you do not start to shift the way you think as a leader, and the way your organization, what the culture is based on. And so much of what we do in this field, and I can say this because I've done it and I'm still working on not doing this, is rooted in ageist beliefs, right? And so in my mind, I think here's the disruption. We all say we want to do things that are evidence-based. Like I hear that all the time at conferences. And what the common theme for senior living organizations is, come here, put your feet up. We're going to have the best everything we can do for Steve. And Steve, you don't have to worry about a thing. There is no research that says that's what we need for a long and healthy life. No research. And if somebody can find it, show it to me. What the research does show, right, is we need meaningful purpose, a reason to get up in the morning, a little bit of stress in our lives, right? Something that's challenging us. We need true belonging, right? Not just this come and live in a community, but a true community culture. We need to be in communities where there's a really age positive kind of vibe that I'm rethinking the way what it means to grow older. And then we need to continue growing and learning. And what I really believe is we need to make a huge shift from this idea of the people that live in our communities as customers, because that's disabling. That is causes helplessness. It's yuck. I mean, I don't want to just be a customer when I get older. I want to be a citizen. And that's what we're focused on, right? So this citizenship model is I'm not only in control of my own life, but I have an impact on the people around me. I have responsibilities to the people around me, right? Which kind of gets into that, how do you address bullying and how do you address all these common problems we have? Well, in a healthy community culture, you have citizens who have in their healthy norms of living in that community, and people call each other out, right? You don't have to have this policy of anti-bullying because it becomes the culture. So I think that it sounds simple, right? It's not some new technology. It's not some new pricing structure. It's shifting the culture and getting rid of this idea that when we get older, we can't learn new things. We don't have anything to give back. And that we should just be happy to come live in this beautiful building. We need more than that. So that's my challenge. Let's follow the evidence.
Absolutely. So I was on a webinar and this just sort of popped into my head. This was a week or 10 days ago. I was a panelist, and I realized that senior living as it exists today is a lot like being on a jury. Ever been on a jury?
No, I haven't.
It's a terrible experience. So when you get picked for a jury, you go in and the judge comes in and he'll start out with a speech that says, you are the most important part of the whole process because you're the ones who are judging. And so you feel, oh man, that feels pretty good. And then she proceeds to give you this long list of things that you can't do. You can't ask questions. Often you can't take notes out. You can't talk to anybody about it. You can't, just this long list. And I realized that that's just what it's like with senior living, right? And this is where the ageism comes in, as we go to residents and say, you're what this is all about. And then here's all the stuff you can't do. And here's all this stuff you have to do. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
so
totally.
And so how do we get past that? How do I change my thinking?
Well, it's hard to, so when I think about this, we need to stop thinking of ourselves as a manager of like this resort, right? And become community builders. And so if I'm a community builder, if I'm an executive director at a community or a life enrichment director, whatever my role is, it's kind of like being a mayor, right? So a mayor's job is to, and this is all coming from work that was done by, I'm trying to think of the author's name who wrote all these books on community. I'll think about it and put it in the links or in the comments later. But a mayor's job is to provide infrastructure and to build social fabric and bring out the best in everyone. Right. And so if you start thinking about that differently, I'm not going to make all the rules about how things happen in the community. I'm going to work with people together and we're going to come up with what that means. So here's an example. So Christian living communities during COVID, as we all know, we swung like it was scary. Right. And so you have all these rules, and for our unregulated areas like residential living, all these rules, and here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. And of course, all the people that lived in the community, include my parents live at one of our communities, were like, this is like being in jail. And CLC was doing the very best. And our clinical team they were doing the best that they knew how at the time. Yeah. And then our vice president of clinical services, Pat McBride, said, that we need to rethink this. And so they developed these committees. They called them health and happiness committees, where the committees where the residents work with, and they still do this to this day, work with community leadership and say, here's the risk. What decisions do we want to make together to protect ourselves and our neighbors? Yeah. Right. So, and they came up with this dial. So when the positivity rate's this, here's what we're all agreeing that we're going to do to protect our community. And they probably came up with the same things that leadership would have done, but it's that citizenship again of we are part of this and making these decisions. But it's hard as a leader because you're giving up control. You know what I mean?
And for me, this is an area that's really hard to understand, because as I look at my team, my goal is to let them do, don't come ask me for permission. I hired you because I trust you. And so it's sort of intuitive, native to me. And I don't understand the control distrust model. But I've talked to a few leaders who, mostly when I talk to leaders, they hate resident meetings, right? Because they see the resident meetings as just this massive bitch session that they've got to endure. But I've talked to a few leaders who go into their resident meetings and can hardly wait for them, because they come in and they say, what can we do better? I got to put this comment up. I love this. I agree.
That's funny, Michelle.
I agree, Michelle. Absolutely. I'll vote. So, I guess maybe, how do you get to the point where that's okay and you can embrace that stuff? How did you get there?
It's a journey, really. And I'll tell you that a lot of clarity came to me after so at Claremont Park, we did a huge transformation, physical transformation of the campus, huge cultural transformation. And a lot of it was bumbling along and making mistakes and conversations. conversations with people. And that is, I think, so important. So when when I would go to, if I read something in one of your columns, Steve, or Bill Thomas said something
Yep.
about whatever it might have been, ageism and ableism, I would say, okay, and I go and I changed our resident meetings from these big, Jill stands at a podium and tells people a bunch of stuff, to smaller groups with circles, and we would sit
Yep.
and talk. And I would bring up concepts, maybe about community building or inclusion or whatever it was, and let's talk about this. What do you all think? What comes to your mind? And growing the resident leadership in that community. That I'm the executive director, but we all are leaders here. It really starts to shift things, and then the people that lived at the community and people that worked at that community would be like, I think we need to push this further. And so so there's a great, amazing CEO of a community in Canada called Sherbrooke Community Center. And she says you have to lay the path as you walk it. And I think so often she's amazing. And we think, well, I have to know exactly how to make this happen. You just have to take the first step. And so if somebody's out there watching this and they're like, I like this concept of citizenship and community, then I'll put the link to the book in there. Get the book and read it. Maybe start a book club with the residents. Bring a concept in and with your team and residents, just start talking about it. And you will start to see things, and people will push you as the leader to go further, which can be uncomfortable, but it's necessary.
Yeah. And I think that as a leader of an organization, my number one job, as I see it, is to exploit. I know the word exploit has negative connotation, but I only use this in a good way. But my job is to exploit my team's strengths, because every one of them has amazing strengths, and to cover their weaknesses by somebody else's strengths, so that everybody is doing this. So one of the things that I haven't written this for a long time, but I used to propose a way to cut costs, and this was way before COVID, was to actually sit back and say, are there things that I could have even hire residents to do? So maybe there's a resident who's right on the cusp of being able to afford to live here. Could I hire them as a front desk kind of person? Mm-hmm. And I talk to people about that, and they'd say, can't do that. They're going to look at documents and gossip.
Right.
And it just used to break my heart. I mean, it's like, these are people who were successful enough in business to be able to afford to live in your community. And yet you've got people who are probably less successful, who have access and that are struggling in life, who have this access, and you trust it. I don't know.
And you think about it too. So at one of our communities, one of our 55 plus communities that we manage, one of the residents is the concierge there. I think it has to go deeper. We have these different things that are happening. We've got a staffing challenge. That's right. And the population shift, it's not going to get better. We've got older people with less resources, and we have the need for purpose as we get older. So when you put all that together, it's kind of like and I think Amy Schechtman from To Life in Boston is working on that kind of, when I was talking to her at a conference, she said it's a kibbutz versus a cruise ship model, right? When you live here, you also work here, you volunteer here, whatever it might look like. See, there you go.
Somebody, I can't see who it is, but somebody has made the mention that what we're talking about is very much like a kibbutz. And I agree with that. I mean, I think it makes perfect sense, right?
So I think you're right. I mean, the immediate thing is, we could never do that because of this and this and this. But I think we've got to push ourselves to look at other ways of doing things, for sure.
Yeah. And I guess the last thing, maybe we're just about out of time, but one of the areas that I think there's so much opportunity that I just don't see tapped into is, we talk about what you've been talking about, sort of this community of residents and team members, is sort of a, Zappos, when Zappos uses the word customers, they talk about both employees and the people who are buying shoes, because from their mind, that's their thinking. But the other resource that I don't think we tap into enough is family members.
Yes.
And
yes.
So how do you just make this one big munch together so it's community where it's life, right?
So here's my challenge. I was speaking at a conference here in Denver. I was on a panel, and I said, because we were talking about just that, and think about what could be different with our staffing challenges if, instead of family members coming to meetings and saying, Steve, why can't you get consistent team members to be here? And Steve, as the administrator, you're saying, well, let me see what I can do and try to fix that. Is if we said, we are all in this together. Hey, families, we're all in this together. We all want the same thing. We are a community. You're a citizen. I'm a citizen. Residents, everybody is. Team members. What are we going to do together to solve this problem? I think we could make some things happen. And it could really shift, because I think there are a lot of families out there that want to have more influence on the community where their parents live. There are some that don't. But so if anybody out there is doing that, I'd love to hear about that.
I would love to hear that too. I think the thing that you really hit on more than anything else is this idea of, and it fits with your citizen model, is we're all in this together. And if we take we're all in this together,
powerful. It
will
be incredibly powerful.
It will be transformative. So one more time, I want to pop up this, oh, that's the wrong one. That's an old one. Don't use that one. Use this one. So discount code just today, 218, good till midnight. I don't know what time Pacific, probably, since that's where I'm located. And we would love to have you be a part of the Evolve 2022. It's geared for your life enrichment. There's a lot of content in there for executive directors and regionals, because ultimately for all of this, and this really ties into our conversation, Jill, life enrichment is where the low-hanging fruit is right now.
Yes.
No question about that.
Well, I think the activities profession needs a rebranding, right? It's essential. The work of community life enrichment, whatever you call it, is essential to the health of individuals and the community. So I'm really excited about the conference and really excited to be part of it.
So, anyway, Jill, thank you very much. And we're going to close out with this.